Thank you for joining our webinar this afternoon. My name is Kate Ryan. I'm a partner in the family team at IBB Law. And today, me and my guest speakers, Claire Macklin, who is a breakup and divorce coach, joins us, and Graeme Cowie, who is a director at IBB Wealth and a senior strategic planner, is also here to talk to you and to offer, hopefully, some very helpful tips and some practical insights into the sorts of things you might need to think about if you are embarking upon a divorce or a separation, whether you're right at the beginning of that journey or you're at the very difficult stage of thinking about divorcing or separating, and all of the things that go with that. And what we all really want to try and achieve in this webinar is to give you some helpful guidance with regards to some of the things that you may need to start thinking about, and really how each of us, both myself, Claire and Graeme, can really try and support you through that process. I will leave Claire and Graeme to talk to you about their expertise and how they can individually support you through that process when they say their bit. And I will start just by talking a little bit about the divorce process to begin with, and then moving on to some practical tips and some of the things that you would all need to think about with regards to trying to reach an agreement and how you might best do that. We hope that there will be time for questions at the end. We would like for it to be as interactive as possible. So if you do have any questions, please do let us know what they are, either in the group chat or by saying them to us at the end of this webinar. Okay. So effectively, I think the best place to start would be by talking to you just very briefly about the change in legislation that happened last year with regards to the divorce process, and how it is now really straightforward from a process perspective, certainly not from an emotional perspective, but from a process perspective, it is relatively straightforward to now move forward with a divorce. There is now only one ground for divorce, and that's that the marriage is irretrievably broken down. You can make an application yourself individually, or you can make a joint application with your spouse on the basis that you both accept that the marriage is broken down. And you can do that online. The process has really been streamlined so that you need really minimal support from solicitors. Obviously, solicitors are there to help and guide you if you need them, but you are able to do that on your own online should you wish to. And I think the reason that it's been all moved online, obviously that's important, but also with regards to making it more simple, both an individual and a joint application, really goes to the root of what family law is trying to do, which is to achieve a much more conciliatory, less costly approach to this very difficult time. So I'm not going to spend too much time, as we simply don't have the time today to talk you through the entire process. But obviously, I just wanted to point out that it is not a hugely difficult step to take from a process perspective. And obviously, your solicitor will be able to guide you should you need them, but you can also do it yourself online. And effectively, when people think about divorce, naturally, I think one of the first things that pops into their head is that this is going to be a hugely costly process. They're going to end up in court, arguing with their other spouse, with lawyers fighting back and forth. And I think I want to really try and dispel that myth. Certainly the team at IBB work very closely with a range of professionals to try and achieve a resolution that is right for you and your family. And I would really like to say that you've got, don't think like that when you're about to embark upon this process. I know it's really easy to do so, and you'll have 1,000,001 questions going around in your head, let alone the fact that it's also very difficult emotionally. But there are many, many other options that you can think about and forums that you can use to try and reach a resolution without the need going to court and spending lots and lots of money on that process. And I'm just going to talk to you very briefly about some of those options. Number one is mediation. Many of you may have heard of mediation. It's a really helpful forum where you and your spouse can go to see a mediator who is an informal third party, impartial, there to try and facilitate your discussions and assist you with reaching an agreement. And really, at mediation, you can talk about anything, whether it be the marital finances and how the assets are divided, whether you need to talk about the arrangements for the children in the future, all in a really open and comfortable environment. And you've got to feel comfortable discussing these things, and the mediator is there to try and keep you focused so that it doesn't get too emotional and go off track, but also to help you overcome any obstacles that you will face in going through those discussions. If you are able to reach an agreement via the mediation process, not only is it less costly, it's obviously something that sort of supports the need that you're going to be working together, particularly if you're going to continue to co-parent. It can really help your relationship moving forward. And it's one that you can then go back to. Once you've reached an agreement, you can then go back to your solicitors if you have them, and you can ask your solicitors to draft any agreement that you reach, which is called a memorandum of understanding, into a legally binding document. All of that can be done without the need to go to court and engage in lots and lots of solicitors' correspondence. So that's certainly something to consider. And there are many good experienced mediators out there. Most of them are family lawyers. Whilst they can't advise you specifically, they can provide you with information. They know how the court process works, they know the law, and they can help you overcome obstacles that you may hit in your discussions with regards to that. The other way that you might want to think about discussing your financial arrangements or children arrangements is through solicitor-led negotiation, which certainly does have a place, particularly if your respective lawyers can work together. They should really both be members of Resolution, which is a family law organisation that promotes the way that we approach situations, the language that we use and how we act in a conciliatory, focused way to try and achieve agreement. And I think if you are lucky enough to have those solicitors on your side, then that will also help in your discussions in reaching an agreement more quickly. And you can also have what's called a round table meeting, where you and your solicitors sit down together and discuss the outstanding issues, try and narrow some of the issues, all with the aim of trying to reach an agreement. This is a side of mediation. You may well have tried mediation, it didn't work, or you may decide that this route might be better for you because the issues you may feel might be better dealt with in this way. That's also less costly. The slightly more formal ways, but not going into full-blown court proceedings, are there are several routes that I just wanted to talk to you very quickly about. One is arbitration. Some of you may well have heard of arbitration. An arbitrator is effectively acts like a judge in a court hearing. An arbitrator is usually a judge, or certainly a part-time judge or a barrister. And arbitration is becoming a lot more common in family law, purely because it's much quicker. It can be done in a much less formal way. Parties can have sort of open conversations together about their arbitration. You can put forward a number of arbitrators that you may want to use. And the other great thing about arbitration is that it's relatively quick. If you decide that arbitration is something that feels right for you, then the arbitrator will sit and adjudicate on your case in a day. And following that day, they will provide you with an award or a decision, not too far. It's usually a few days after the arbitration. And that decision is binding. It's exactly the same as getting a judgment in court. It's just as binding as a decision from a judge. But you can organise it yourself. You can arrange it within your own time frame to meet your own needs, fitting it in with your own other commitments. And that can be a lot quicker than going down the court process. And obviously, with these things, you have, a lot going on. The last thing you need is to have a sort of a 6-month waiting date for a hearing when your life is on hold. So arbitration can be really important and helpful in determining a decision for you both, whether it be finances or children. There are special children arbitrators that deal purely with children, or a mix, and financial as well. There is also something called a private financial dispute resolution hearing, which is probably the most formal of the options that I'm going to talk to you about, save as for the full-blown court option, which is where you choose to come out of the court process and pay for a judge yourself to determine or give you an indication as to what they think the likely outcome of your case might be. This is purely only to deal with the finances. It's not something that you could necessarily may not necessarily be effective with regard to the children arrangements, but certainly when it comes to determining how the marital assets are to be divided, a private FDR can again be helpful. But you do have to pay for a judge. You both have to agree, and you then have to pay for a judge whom you can both choose to sit and preside over your hearing for that day and provide you with an indication. The indication is not binding like an arbitration, but it is a really helpful insight into what might happen if you were to end up at a final hearing in the court process. The final hearing in the court process is the third hearing, so it's quite a long way to go, quite a lot of costs to get there, with the risk of not knowing how the judge is going to determine the matter at the end of it. So the private FDR can also be helpful if you're in the court system and you want to try and come out of it to get your indication sooner than you would. There has been a lot of change in the family court system, thankfully, recently with regards to listing hearings, and hearings are being listed a lot quicker, but it is still a good 4 to 5 months between hearings. And that's a long time when you're in these situations and you're trying to really get to an end where you can draw a line in the sand and move on. And the final option is obviously where you cannot narrow the issues and one of you needs to make an application to court and go through the formal process, which is the last resort, effectively. So they are some of the really good options that you can discuss with your solicitor, think about yourself when you are thinking about how you're going to get through this and reach an agreement and come out the other side. Mediation, arbitration, solicitor-led negotiations with a roundtable meeting, or perhaps a private FDR if you are in the court system but want to try and shorten it and make it less costly. And I think finally, what I will just touch upon is some helpful practical tips, things that you also ought to think about, perhaps before you embark upon your forum for discussions, and all the sorts of things that you might want to think about gathering together so that you're in the best possible position to meet with your solicitor or your mediator, or the other spouse if you're going to sit down and have a discussion together about how you work through this. The first thing that I would say is something that is much easier said than done in practice, but that is to think about who is going to file the application for divorce, if you can. You should think perhaps that the divorce process is one separate process to discussing the finances and then any issues that you've got with regards to the arrangements for the children. And in my experience, if you are both at the point where you appreciate that the marriage is irretrievably broken down and you accept that, then you should file your petition or your application for divorce or your joint application for divorce as soon as you feel you can. And the reason for that is that the court process, the divorce process will then move forward, and you can hopefully then have some sensible discussions around the children and the finances alongside of that, so that when you get to the appropriate stage in the divorce process, which is the conditional order stage, you are then able to hopefully house your agreement in what's called a consent order, which is a legally binding enforceable document which sets out the things that you have decided to do, for example, in respect to the financial assets, and file that with the court for approval. So it's a good idea to just think about kickstarting the divorce if you can. As I said, I appreciate it's easier said than done. And if you can't, then don't worry, because you will then have to do that at some point anyway together, because you will be guided towards that, and naturally you might feel more comfortable doing it at a later point in the process. And the other thing to think about is collating financial information, that goes without saying, perhaps having your house valued, it may not have been valued for a long time. All of these things can actually be really difficult, I accept that. But if you can try and make a list and think practically about the sorts of things that you might need to do that will help you, this would be really good. Get the house valued if you can by local agents. Any other properties that you may have that are either in your joint names or that are in your or your spouse's sole name, speak to them about having those valued, because it would be really important to get an up-to-date picture as to what the value of the assets are. That's going to be really helpful moving forward for you. Any joint statements that you haven't had management of or sight of, you need to understand what those accounts hold. Perhaps also think about budgets, what your monthly, yearly budget is likely to be, what sorts of things you might need to think about in terms of the cost of those things. And doing a budget is also really helpful because it will help try and focus your mind on those practical steps, which, as I say, can be really difficult to do when you're dealing with all of the emotion and life on top of that, all the other things that you've got to think about. Doing the sort of the practical financial things, getting that information together and leaving it in a folder will really help you when you go and see your solicitor or your financial advisor or anybody else that you're going to seek help from, because these are the sorts of things that they will ask for. Even if you're going to mediation, it's better to have all of this information before you go to mediation, because it will just really support the discussions that you're having around what your future looks like. So I think I've probably said enough. Do ask any questions that you've got at the end. I'm going to hand you over to Claire Macklin, who, as I mentioned, is a breakup and divorce coach, and I will let her introduce herself.
Thank you very much, Kate. Farah, are you able to open my slides up for me? Just wait for those to come. Here we go. Oh, those are Graeme's ones.
Can everyone see my screen?
I can.
Yes.
Perfect. Okay.
I can only see Graeme so far.
Sorry, I had switched onto your slides, Claire. Can you see them now? They're on your slides.
No.
Okay, let me share again. Bear with me.
Okay.
We've just got Graeme's far.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry.
The wonders of modern technology. It's marvellous, isn't it?
It wouldn't be right without a hiccup, would it?
It wouldn't, would it?
In this day and age.
Oh, there we go.
Perfect.
Perfect. So I'm going to do my best Chris Whitty impression and say next slide when I want you to swap to the next one, if that's okay. Perfect. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Claire Macklin, and as Kate said, I'm a breakup and divorce coach with specialist training in that area. I'm a master NLP practitioner. I used to be a lawyer, but not a family lawyer. And I've been divorced twice now. I'm the single mum of 2 boys in their late teens. And I'm also the author of a book, Breakup from Crisis to Confidence, which I'll show you in a second. Just very, very briefly, a little bit about my story, because I think it's helpful. The first time I got divorced, I was 35 and my children were 3 and 1. And it was a sudden shock. So my husband told me we were actually watching Holby City, and I asked him if he was okay, and he said, no, I've been seeing someone else. And that's how my marriage ended, my first marriage. So it was a huge shock, bolt from the blue, and I had no idea. But over the next months and a couple of years, I rebuilt my life from scratch. And then it was that experience and what I learned through that led me to set up my business about 6 years ago to support other people who were moving through sudden separations. And then I went through my second divorce. So my second divorce was my choice. I'd remarried in 2016, but by 2020 it was quite clear to me that it was increasingly unhappy, so I chose to walk away. So I've made the decision to leave that marriage, and again I've rebuilt my life from scratch again in the subsequent 3 years. So I have experience of going through a divorce from both the angle of being the person for whom it's a great shock, and also the person who makes the very difficult decision to say that a divorce is what they want. Next slide, please, Farah. Thank you very much. So this is my book, Breakup from Crisis to Confidence. I've just released edition 2 because I've changed my name. Some of you may know me as Claire Black, which was my old name. And I've rewritten some of it and added in quite a lot from my experience of my second divorce. So it's available on my website and through Amazon. So please do get a copy of that if you'd like to. Next slide, please, Farah. And then these are the ways that I work. So in all of my work, these 7 things are fundamental. So I work with you to concentrate on yourself, to get calm and clarity, to focus on what you can control rather than what you can't, to see options and choices, to communicate more effectively with both your ex and your lawyer, and also then to create a new and vibrant future that you're actually excited about. So what I want to do today, I'm going to divide my talk into 2 sections. First of all, kind of what to expect emotionally. And then secondly, some practical strategies that you hopefully will be able to take away from today's session and start using. Next slide, please. So divorce is now accepted as possibly one of the most traumatic things that you can go through in life, second only to the death of a loved one. And it can be very painful. It can be messy. It can be difficult. There are emotional ups and downs, and it's tiring and stressful. And it can really feel like your whole life is derailed. It will always include change and uncertainty, and it can be therefore confusing, and there can be a lot of fear about what the future might look like. Next slide, please. So these are some of the feelings that I experienced when I was going through particularly my first divorce, and that my clients talk about a lot in our sessions. And often my clients ask me if these feelings are normal, and they absolutely are. These are totally normal emotions to feel when you're separating or going through a divorce. And that can be true whether that divorce is your choice or whether it's something that's been thrust upon you as a shock. Every day can sometimes feel like a bit of a roller coaster. Because this isn't just the dissolution of a marriage. This is a perfect storm often of really strong feelings at the same time as you're worrying about your children, you're worrying about where you might live, you're worrying about what your finances will look like, you're worrying about whether you're able to work. And it requires you to make decisions that will affect the rest of your life at a time when you might feel least able to make those decisions. So your emotions can have a huge impact on the legal process. Next slide, please. And there's a healing cycle to go through. So whether the divorce was your choice or not, you will go through these stages. They're based on the work of a psychologist called Elizabeth Kubler-Ross in the late 1960s. And she worked on grief. And it's now accepted that this applies to all kinds of transitions. So looking at these stages, the first stage that you might go through is denial. This is where your brain's protecting you from the pain of what's happening by not allowing you to actually believe that it is happening. So if your divorce is a shock, this stage can be really acute and very overwhelming. You might have thoughts like, this isn't real. I'll wake up tomorrow and everything will be okay. This isn't happening to me. And if the divorce is your choice, then you may have already been through this stage in the year or 2 years or however long preceding your decision, maybe even for several years. The kind of thoughts of it's not that bad, perhaps we can work this out, until you get to the point of actually saying out loud that this is what you want. The second stage then is anger. And in this stage, you probably feel like you've got a lot more energy. And anger often masks other emotions. So that might be fear or pain or hurt or betrayal, for example, or guilt. And it can be directed at other people or at yourself or at the situation. It gives you energy, but it can keep you stuck, and it can lead you to do things that you might later regret. And ultimately, I think if you hold on to anger, it can keep you in a place where you can't move forward. And holding on to that anger for the long term can leave you feeling quite bitter and can keep you very emotionally tied to the past. The third stage is bargaining. Again, this is your brain trying to protect you a bit from the pain by coming up with things that you could perhaps have done differently or could do differently to change the situation. So it's trying to postpone the confusion or the sadness or the hurt. It's a way for your brain to try and take back some level of control. So you might have thoughts like, if I had just been a better partner, then he or she wouldn't have left. Perhaps I can show them now that I'm a better partner. Or if you made the decision, this might be the stage at which you start to doubt your decision. And sometimes one partner will make all kinds of promises to change in this phase to try and get the very familiar relationship back. The next stage is depression. This is when reality really sinks in, and it can be quite overwhelming. Maybe you don't want to get out of bed in the morning. Maybe you spend whole days crying and feeling really low. And it's really important to look after yourself in this stage because your energy will be low too. But remember, this is a normal part of going through a breakup. It doesn't mean that you will feel like this forever. And then the last stage is acceptance, which doesn't mean necessarily that you're happy about what happened. But what it does mean is that you can accept it's happened and you can live with it, that you have some hope and motivation to start to create a future that you're looking forward to. Now, this curve is not straight, it's not linear, it's not simple. It can be really messy. You might swirl around the different stages. You might feel angry one minute and depressed the next. It can change very, very quickly. But it can also help, particularly if you're the person who has asked for the divorce, it can help to remember this and feel some compassion perhaps for the person who this might have been a shock for. And remember, you'll both be on this curve, as will your children too. It helps, I think, to know that you're not alone, that you're going through a process. And it can also help to identify which stage you might be at any particular moment in time. Because grieving is really important. And different people will grieve different things. So some of you may grieve the loss of promise of what should have been, or the loss of the person that you loved, or perhaps the loss of wider relationships within your ex-partner's family. And there's also a loss around your identity, who you are as a wife or a husband, and also the loss of practical things and emotional things that you're tied to, like your home. So sometimes my clients say they don't ever think that they will get to acceptance. And I always say to people, if you believe you won't get to acceptance, then it's likely that you won't ever get to acceptance. And so part of the journey is coming to that belief that you can get through this and you can get over it. One day, one step at a time. Next slide, please. Thank you. So really important in this is to be able to identify your emotions, and your emotions will be individual to you. They'll be unique. They'll be different for everybody. They can be intense, they can be overwhelming, and they can be quite contradictory. So I remember feeling both relief and sad all at the same time. Your emotions are your body's way of communicating with you. There are kind of subconscious responses to events, and they can absolutely hijack our logical brains and send us into fight, flight, freeze, which isn't always very useful when you're going through a divorce. So I use this wheel with my clients a lot to help them identify what it is they're feeling, to keep track of those feelings, and to notice how long they last, because all feelings are transitory. And I often teach my clients a particular strategy to deal with the transitory nature of those feelings. Next slide, please. Which I call surfing your emotions. So you can surf your emotions. So rather than imagining that your emotions are kind of, you have to kind of fight against them, or you have to squash them down. Imagine that you're a surfer and you're paddling out to sea, and you can see a wave of emotion coming towards you. As it gets closer, you can choose to turn your board and ride that wave and ride it into the shore. Because like a wave on the beach, a wave of emotion will always break at some point. It will always pass. So remind yourself that you're on this wave, you're moving towards the beach, and once you get there, you're going to be safe. Allow yourself to feel it without resisting. And as long as it's safe, just do what you need to do right now to ride that wave into the shore. And as the emotion that you're feeling begins to die down, which it will, you can imagine that you're coming onto the beach, that the wave has broken around you, and that you're landing on soft sand. And you can sit and breathe and feel the sun on your back. Allow your breathing to return to normal, and notice that that feeling has washed over you and passed by. And it can be really helpful to do this, to allow those emotions to move through you. And it can be really comforting then to imagine yourself on that beach at the end. Thank you. Next slide, please. So some practical tips for you at the start of your divorce journey. The first one is to get your support network in place, because divorce isn't just a legal journey. There's an emotional journey and a financial journey as well. So knowing who's who in your support network is really important. So get your legal support in place, get specific advice on your circumstances, get your financial support in place to get clarity on your assets and specific advice on your situation, because it won't be the same as your friend's situation or your family's situation. And then get your emotional support if you need some in place, a coach or a therapist to work with you to help you handle all the things that are going to be thrown your way. And then, of course, there's friends and family. So I like to think of radiators and drains. So spend time with your radiators, those people who help you to feel good, those people who lift you up, who support you, who ask you what you need, and then give it to you. And avoid those people who you come away from feeling drained. Those people who are I like to call them the drama llamas. They're only really interested in what's happening to you because they want to gossip about it, or they want to compare to their own lives. And also avoid those "if I were you" grades. So those are the people who say, well, if I were you, I would do this, this, and this. Or when I got divorced, I did X, Y, and Z. Their situation isn't yours. And they aren't the people who will have to handle the consequences of whatever actions you might take as a result of what it is that they're telling you to do. So set boundaries with your friends. Share really carefully. You don't have to tell everybody everything about what's happening to you. And you don't have to talk about it if you don't want to. Next slide, please. Remembering to breathe. Now, your breath is a massively important and powerful resource. You always have it, and it costs you nothing. It's completely free. Breathing is one of the best things that you can do to help yourself feel calm when something happens. Breathing and counting is a really good thing to do. So we could do this very quickly now. If you breathe in and count to 5 in your head, hold for 2, and then breathe out and count to 7. Hopefully you will notice your heart rate beginning to drop, your thoughts beginning to slow down, because you can't count and think at the same time. You can use this strategy to interrupt kind of swirling, questioning, panicky thoughts. And once you've got that oxygen into your brain, it will help soothe the fight, flight, freeze response and get you back into a position where you can bring your logical brain back on side. Next slide, please. And then fundamentally, work out what it is that you can and can't control. So you might find yourself, for example, wishing that your ex-partner would behave differently or do something in a certain way. You might be thinking thoughts like, well, why on earth can't he or she just understand what I'm trying to tell them? Or how can I get my ex to stop doing this? Often we try and control and focus on the very thing that we don't have any control over, which is other people. Ultimately, you can control the things in the blue circle in the middle here. That's your zone of power. You can control your words, your actions, your thoughts and feelings and reactions and decisions. When you start wishing that the other person was different, you slide into the yellow zone on here, which I call the yellow zone of frustration. When you find yourself spending time focusing on what your ex is saying or doing, or how you can get them to understand your perspective, you're likely to end up very frustrated or angry or feeling helpless and resentful. So by focusing on them, you're giving your power away. So a really good question to ask is, what can I control here? What's within my power to control? And that might be simple things. So it might be deciding to shop in a different supermarket, having a new haircut, wearing clothes that make you feel good, or perhaps changing some things around at home or how you start your day. And it might be bigger things, perhaps more fundamental long-term things like choosing what kind of parent you want to be on your time, or choosing how you want to respond to letters and communication from your ex-partner or their solicitor. So work out what you can and can't control, really fundamental. Next slide, please. And then set your intentions. So you can absolutely decide how you want to show up in your divorce. So really good questions to ask might be, where do I want my relationship with my ex-partner to be in 6 months, in a year, in 5 years, at our child's wedding? And that absolutely kept me on the straight and narrow. I knew in my first divorce that I wanted to be able to attend my children's wedding with my ex-partner and for there not to be a problem, and for my children to know that they could invite us both and that it would be okay. What you can do once you've worked out what your vision for where you want to get to is keep it right in the forefront of your mind. And then you can ask yourself, is what I'm about to do or say going to take me nearer to that or further away? And use that to keep yourself moving towards the vision that you've had. Even if your ex-partner doesn't play ball, you can absolutely control what you do and how you behave through this divorce. So get really clear on how you want to be and keep that vision right at the front. Remember, you always have choice about what you say, how you react, the words you use, and the actions you take. And one of the most useful mantras I found through both of my divorces was to remind myself that it isn't what happens to me that defines me and matters, it's what I do about it and how I respond that makes the difference. So regardless of your ex-partner, you can approach your divorce with a really strong idea of your intentions and how you want to behave. Next slide, please. And then I want to talk just a little bit about how important it is to look after yourself through all of this. And there's a really lovely little story that I wanted to share. So a psychologist is walking around a room teaching stress management to her class. And she raises a glass of water in her hand and asks the class how much the glass of water weighs. And the answers that called out range from 20 ounces, 8 ounces, 5 ounces. And the psychologist replied to say, well, the absolute weight doesn't actually matter because it depends on how long I hold it. If I hold it for a minute, it's not a problem. If I hold it for an hour, I'm going to have an ache in my arm. If I hold it for a day, my arm's going to feel numb and paralyzed. In each case, the weight of the glass makes no difference. It doesn't change. It's the length of time I hold it. And the longer I hold it, the heavier it becomes. And the stresses and worries of your divorce are a bit like that, a bit like the glass of water. So think about them for a few minutes and nothing happens. Think about them for a bit longer, they start to hurt. And if you think about them all day long, you'll feel paralyzed and incapable of doing anything. So my really strong advice is to look after yourself through your divorce. Eat well if you can, or little and often if your appetite, like mine, really goes away. Find a few minutes every day to do something that's just for you and that you enjoy. Maybe it's taking a bit of exercise. Maybe it's spending time on the phone with somebody that you care about. Maybe it's playing with your children. Maybe it's taking a walk in the countryside. Whatever it is, try and do something every day that's just for you and that is kind to yourself. Next slide, please. And then lastly, one step at a time. You don't have to see the whole staircase right now. You can take it one step at a time. Each step that you take will take you a step closer to the end of this process. So break everything down into chunks and do it one tiny step at a time. Each tiny step will add up. And then when you look back over a year or 6 months, you'll realize that you have taken huge leaps. So one step at a time. And another little mantra that goes with this that I like is you can do anything, but you can't do everything. And you can't do everything all at once. So take it one step at a time. Thank you, Farah. That's the end of my slides. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Claire. Thanks, Claire. Thanks very much. Some really practical tips there. I very much enjoyed the one about breathing. It's always useful to get a mindfulness lesson, and especially when you're about to present, actually taking some deep breaths. A very practical tip there. Thank you. Well, thanks, everybody. I'm Graeme Cowie. I'm a director at IBB Wealth. We are the financial planning and wealth management arm of the wider IBB group. And clearly, with a large family team at IBB, myself and the team of planners that we have a great deal of experience and knowledge and of working with clients who are going through the divorce process and supporting them, and indeed our colleagues in lots of different ways. And I was going to spend the next 10 minutes or so just giving some practical tips, or what I hope are practical tips, on how to address finances and what you need to be thinking about from a financial point of view as you go through this process. Farah, are you able to put the slides up? essentially where I was going to cover was where you need to start from a financial point of view, some of the common mistakes that people will make when they approach their finances through this process. And then lastly, just to cover off a number of the different areas where myself and my role as a financial planner can work with solicitors and indeed other advisors within this process to help clients reach the conclusion that they wish. Thank you, Farah. Can I ask you to move on to the first slide, please, Farah? So, where must I start? Well, I think firstly, and this is going to sound a very easy thing to do, but clearly in practice is very difficult rather, is to detach yourself emotionally from the money itself and the money issues, and a requirement for you to be strategic in your approach to looking at the finances. And that sounds very simple, but clearly, as I think Claire's very eloquently demonstrated, that is not an easy thing to do, but it's something that you need to do. Essentially, the financial conclusion to your divorce needs to be looked at as essentially as a very cold business type transaction. And if you're able to do that, then managing and navigating your way through the finances of a divorce, I think will be a lot easier. But practically, you need to get a grip on the money. Get copies of paperwork, as Kate alluded to earlier. There's some very simple things that you can do right at the start. So get copies of all the financial paperwork. Break financial ties. Close joint accounts. Open up a bank account in your own name if you haven't already got one. Be very, very clear on the debts within the marriage and the relationship. Okay, what are they? Be very clear about what they are and what they mean. And most specifically, be very clear about costs and the budget. Kate, again, talked about this earlier, but having a very clear idea about what your expenses are and what your budget is from the very outset will pay huge dividends as you go through this process. So, essentially, in terms of where you start, I think that's a very good place to start. Common mistakes? Well, as I've just said, not understanding debts within the marriage, I think is a big mistake that people make from the outset, not understanding mortgages, credit card debts, etc., what all of these different debts are and what they will mean ultimately to the financial conclusion. Having an emotional attachment to assets, again, not thinking about things strategically. A very clear example of that is it would be, the marital home. There's some people will have a very strong attachment to the marital home and perhaps feel that they couldn't possibly leave it, move house, perhaps because of children issues, etc. But it might not be practical for you to keep it, and it's something that you definitely need to consider is actually what happens to the marital home. Because you could end up essentially keeping a house that you can't afford. Looking at assets on a singular basis rather than at the bigger picture, again, is a common mistake that people make, and the house, again, I think is a very clear example of that. Failing to break financial ties, so still having joint accounts, etc., is a mistake that people will make right from the outset. Not budgeting properly. What are your true outgoings? I think that can be a very sobering experience for people to look at exactly what their outgoings are, but for you to have a handle on exactly what the marital expenses are is absolutely key to making this process as smooth as you possibly can. Again, assuming that an equal division of assets is a fair division, because it might not be. A 50-50 split of assets is not necessarily a fair split. So, that's about understanding what the assets are, what they can do in the future, and indeed working out what a fair split for you is. I think also having unrealistic expectations of what your lifestyle might be post-divorce. This can be a dramatic shock to the finances, the marital finances, and understanding exactly what that means both now and in the future and for your financial future, I think is key to achieving both a fair outcome and one that you can reach as smoothly as possible. Pensions, it's a big area that financial advisors get involved in the divorce process, but not understanding the true value of pensions, so what type of pension they are and what it means not just today but in retirement, is a key thing for people to understand. Failing to take a fair share of pensions is a big mistake that people make. People will often take a house in lieu of a pension, and that might not be the best financial outcome for people in the long term. So really understanding what the type of pensions there are and what they mean for you is really important. And then there's some really simple things like changing of beneficiaries' names on insurance policies. You know, if you pass away, then you might not want your other half to be the beneficiary of a life insurance policy. So there are very practical things like that you need to consider. Failing to make a new will. You know, we are a solicitor firm, and it's something that we see all the time that, that many people don't even have a will. But if you have one and you're going through a divorce process, then it needs to be updated throughout that process. If at the end of the divorce that you're in receipt of a maintenance payment, then not ensuring that maintenance payment should something happen to your other half and their ability to maintain that payment. Again, failing to insure, a big mistake that often happens, that people don't insure that properly. Not understanding the assets themselves. You know, some assets might be illiquid. They might not be able to be converted to cash or to produce an income or to realize the value that you may need. So understanding each of the individual assets is important as well. And I think fundamentally, failing to develop post-divorce financial plan is a big mistake that people make. They get to the end of the process and think they have a handle on the financial circumstances and what it means to them, but sadly, often they don't. So, next slide, please, Farah. I just covered that one, sorry. Next one again, please, Farah. So how can a financial planner help me and my solicitor? Well, there are a number of ways that we work with our colleagues internally and other solicitors as well. I guess the first stage of that is in identifying needs and resources for clients, so around things like pensions, helping bring some clarity to what the pensions are and what they mean in the future. You know, the preparation of schedules of income, both income needs, both in the past and indeed for the future. Practical things like your ability to borrow, so mortgage capacity, affordability of those kind of things, very practical areas that we can help with. Life insurance, critical illness insurance, private medical insurance. Should those policies continue? Should they stop? Should we be arranging them? Should we be encouraging them? And how much do they cost? These are all kind of areas that we would get involved in. There's taxation, the impact of income tax, capital gains tax, stamp duty, land tax, etc. These are all areas that, in looking at the broader and wider financial picture, that we would seek to get involved with in helping clients. And then there's the next stage, which is, well, you know, things like how do you grow the pot? How do you grow the money that's available? Practical things around state pension top-ups, you know, gifts from family, creativity around pensions and the retirement ages. Those are very much areas that we can get involved in, but particularly around the options that are available to you. So as you go through this process, there may be, very likely to be a lot of negotiation around the finances. So ultimately, in the potential settlements that are being put forward to you, what does that mean for you? And that's an area with the cash flow modelling systems that we use in terms of being able to visibly demonstrate to clients what a potential settlement will look like for them, both now and in the future, is a very, very practical way that we get involved in. So cash flow projections, the effect and the outcome of some of the options that are being presented to you. And then ultimately things like estate planning, as I talked about, ensuring that you've got wills in place, the people that you wish to benefit most actually are there to benefit when they can. Okay, so hopefully there's some practical tips for you in terms of the divorce process and the finances around it. Kate, I understand we're going to be open and take some questions at this stage. Is that right?
Yes. What I was going to say was, before I sort of ask any of the people that are listening whether they've got any questions, I wondered whether I could ask each of you a question.
Please do.
Claire, yeah, I'll start with you, Claire. And thanks, Graeme, for that really helpful talk and insight. Claire, I think that not many people, I mean, your talk was really informative and gave some really inspirational sort of options for how we might deal with things. Can you just explain how you might benefit a client that is going through a divorce, really struggling to cope with making decisions and what their sort of life looks like? How have you found in your practice that it's really beneficial to work with clients, given what I've said about how very difficult the legal process can be and the sorts of decisions that they might be being asked to make at that point in time?
Yeah, absolutely. So my goal is to walk alongside my clients. So I build up a strong relationship with all the clients that I work with over a period of time. And I help them with not just strategies to help them manage their emotions, but also strategies that can support them to look at all the different options that they might have. Because one of the things that often happens is clients believe they don't have any choices, they don't have any options. So I spend a lot of time with clients looking through what their different choices might be. If you've only got one, you're stuck. If you've got two, you have a dilemma. If you have three options, then you really have choice. Even if two of those options seem like utter rubbish, you still have choice. So I spend a lot of time helping my clients to focus on what they can do, what choices they do have, what they can control, and building up their confidence so that they can take every step with that confidence and with dignity. So I often spend a lot of time helping my clients to think strategically, to work out what their priorities are, to communicate much more effectively with their ex-partner in particular, because when you get stuck into a cycle of conflict, that's when your costs are going to increase. That's when it's going to get nasty, and that's when you're much more likely to end up in a horrible court case. So I do a lot with my clients to help them find calm, feel confident, know exactly what it is that they want to say, and importantly, not to react through a fog of emotion. And that even when one party to the divorce is in a place where they can do that, that can massively help keep the costs down, and massively help them get to a place where they can do this without necessarily ending up in a huge court battle. And I've worked with clients as well where even if one party does push it through the court, actually, if the other party can be calm and collected and responsive rather than reactive, then you can minimise the huge cost implications of that. So yeah, so I help my clients get control of their emotions, get control of where they want to go, get clear on their strategy, and become able to give really clear instructions to you, which helps you then do your job.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Claire. Graeme, can I ask you a quick question as well? Given
of course.
all the different things you've just outlined that you can assist people with, if you're going through a divorce, when is the best time to come and see you?
Well, I would say right at the start.
Makes your job easier.
Yeah, well, it does. It does. And from a practical point of view, and I think from an ease point of view, I think that's certainly true. I think though where we can help the most, I think is, ultimately what's our job? All of our roles is to help clients and support them to get through this process as quickly and as effectively, and to help them achieve the right or rather the fair result at the end of it. Okay. And I think for us, where we add the most value, I think, is in demonstrating to clients very practically what the settlement or any financial settlement means for them in practical purposes. So demonstrating to them what their financial future is going to look like, for good or for ill. Okay. and being able to show and to demonstrate very visibly using the software that we do, to show them what life is going to look like financially afterwards, or indeed, the impact of any potential settlement, I think is the most powerful work that we do, certainly.
Yeah, great, thank you. I hope that that's been really helpful. Those of you that are listening, does anybody have any questions that they would like to put to either myself, Claire, or Graeme?
There is a question in the chat box. It's from Alison Porter, so I'll just read it out. It's a question for Graeme. Do you help your clients complete their income needs schedules? If so, do you find it time consuming, and would you ever outsource this work to a company like mine, i.e. Pennywise Consultants?
Yes, we do. In fact, I've got a call tomorrow morning on exactly that with a client about helping them fill out, their Form E. So absolutely we do. Would I consider outsourcing it? Yeah, probably, because it can be, quite time consuming. So yes, in the right case, of course we would. We're very used to working with external consultants and working collaboratively.
And I think that word collaborative is what it's all about, isn't it, effectively? And I think certainly from my perspective, I'm so passionate about being able to support my clients, but I can't do everything. That's why I need people like Graeme and Claire to be able to pick up where the parts of this journey that I can't support you on, which is the mental and the emotional side of things, and the financial, the decision making with regards to some of the assets and the decisions that you may need to make in the future. And I think one of the greatest things about this, the way that we work, is that we are all able to meet together to support you. And I think if that's the only message that I get across today, then I will be happy.
Yeah.
Totally agree with you, Kate. That's why it's always one of my first tips is to get that support network in place. And it may feel at the beginning as though then you're having to find extra funds to pay extra people to do extra jobs, but actually in the long run, getting the right people in place for the right things at the right time will really help you to get through this more confidently, in a stronger way, and for it to not be something that defines you moving forward, which I think is massively important. Yeah, absolutely.
We have another question.
Another question?
We do have one in the chat box. It's a question for Claire. What is the impact of a divorce settlement when there has been coercion control in the marriage?
Good question.
Good one.
Yeah. So I have, worked with quite a few people where there's been coercive control going on in the background, and this can continue through the process and actually beyond the process as well. So from my perspective, and this is actually probably a question that I think each of us will have a separate input on, just to show how we all have a different outlook on it. From my perspective, my work would be around supporting my client with strategies to enable them to stay sane, to stay whole, to have belief in themselves through that process, to trust their own judgment, and to look for ways to minimize the amount of contact that they would have with that with their coercive controlling ex-partner following on. So I would be working very closely with your lawyer, with your financial advisor, to think of ways in which we could help you to be as independent as possible moving forward through that. And then I would be working with you independently in terms of self-belief, creating the blueprint for the life that you want moving forward, and strategies to be able to handle any curveball that your ex-partner might throw at you during that process. I hope that answers from my perspective.
Yeah, I would add into that the coercive control is obviously something that is, so difficult to deal with if you are the person that has been coercively controlled. From a legal perspective, the biggest thing is not only supporting that person in having the confidence to deal with the process, particularly the disclosure process, because often they will know absolutely nothing about what's been going on in the marital finances because they simply haven't been allowed to make decisions or deal with anything. Worst case scenario, they literally don't even have their own bank account. And so that is often a really difficult thing to navigate, because you need to ask from a legal perspective, you need to understand what the financial landscape is so that you can advise your clients about the ultimate result and how the assets might be divided. And also, I think what's really important is being able to deal with the issues that someone in a relationship like that, to support them in the decision-making process, which is why it's even more so important to have the various support networks, as Claire and Graeme have both mentioned, around you, so that you feel completely able, supported to make really important decisions, which you may well have just completely not forgotten how to do because you've not been able to do it for so long. And I mean, it really is quite a difficult thing to go through. And what I would say is that if you have a lawyer on your side, it shouldn't affect your financial settlement in terms of the outcome, because obviously we're there to make sure that that element of behaviour isn't going to affect your future as much as, you know, it may have done if you hadn't got that somebody in place to advise you initially. So it's really, really important to make sure you work with the right people that understand.
Kate, I absolutely couldn't agree more with your last point there. I think the statistics are that there's 1 in 4 people in the UK are under some form of coercive control or indeed financial abuse. So my tip on that would be to work with somebody who specialises in that space. Indeed, there's certainly for most professionals, there is a new standard that's been launched, the Financial Abuse Specialist Standard. So, in terms of the impact, I mean, it can have a huge impact clearly on the divorce, but certainly from a practical point of view for anybody approaching divorce who feels under that kind of pressure, then they should certainly be looking to work with somebody who's got that standard and that understanding, that network of people that they've been able to build and specialist knowledge around the area.
Financial control is obviously an aspect of coercive control, and it really is a thing. It really does exist, and it's really damaging. Any other questions? Any more popped up in the chat box, Farah?
None in the chat box.
Okay. Either of you, Claire or Graeme, do you have anything else you want to add?
I think in terms of, I wonder whether it's useful for us all to sort of run through how we can work with people, how people can contact us, that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Brilliant. Do you want me to start? I don't mind.
Go for it. Yeah.
Okay.
Go for it.
So most of my work is one-to-one with face-to-face with clients or online. So I offer varying packages that people can work with me on over sort of 4 to 6 months or longer, and that then brings interim support. So I'm really aware that things don't happen nice and neatly to fit in with sessions. So I with those packages I offer ongoing email and WhatsApp and so on support, so that people can contact me when something happens, as opposed to having to keep it for a week or 2 until their next session. Or you can simply buy blocks of sessions, or I also do sort of 2-hour breakthrough sessions for a focused issue. And I always talk to clients, potential clients, for half an hour or so on the phone or over Zoom, just to check that we're a good fit, because it's really important that we have a relationship of trust. And I was going to say that one thing I think that I'll do as a result of this session is perhaps offer some to anybody who's watching, if you'd like a 2-hour breakthrough session with me, I can offer those at £299, which is reduced from my usual fee, for anybody who's been watching here. If you get in touch with me in the next month or so, I'd be delighted to do that. So people can get then a taster of what working over a longer term might look like. So that's kind of how I work.
Thanks, Claire.
Fantastic.
That's great.
I think if I can jump in at this point, there are a number of different areas clearly that we get involved in working with clients, from understanding their finances to helping with documentation completion to practically demonstrating the impact of any potential settlement. But The one thing I would say about working with any advisor actually is perhaps speak to one or two and find one that, as Claire said, that you feel that you can trust and that your personality match, because that will help you enormously throughout this process. So do a bit of shopping around.
Yeah, I was going to say at the beginning, one of my tips should probably have also been make sure you do your research on who you might want to go and see from a legal perspective. And I will just add that if anyone listening feels that they would like to get in touch with me, then please do so. Drop me an email or give me a call. I'd be more than happy to have a conversation with you on the telephone or Teams. Okay. Well, thanks, everyone. I think if there are no more questions, we will end it there. Many thanks, everybody, for signing up. And I do really hope that you walk away with some helpful information from the webinar. Thanks, Claire, and thanks, Graeme. And thanks very much, Farah, for helping with the slides and setup.
Pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.